Just this last week, the government of India banned TikTok, which had 120 million users in India alone. But it was just not TikTok alone. 58 other apps which had the backing of Chinese companies, which were run by Chinese companies, and some of these companies which were further backed by the Chinese government. All of them were banned from mainland India. All of them were banned from the Play Store of Google. They were banned from the App Store of Apple in India. So no longer can these apps be accessed in India, that they can be run in India, especially TikTok. The kind of nuisance the platform had become, the kind of content it was generating, and the kind of potential trouble it held for the government, for the law enforcement agencies. The ban on TikTok was welcomed by one and all. But there was one other reason why people received the news of TikTok being banned along with 58 other apps with great happiness, rather. Because they now wanted to be more vocal for local apps, more vocal for the apps that were made in India. Already, you can go on Twitter and other social networking platforms, and people can be found tweeting for local apps. For instance, Chingari and Mitro, which are local competitors of TikTok. There are also people who want users to come and opt for apps like MobiKwik, which have been made by Indian entrepreneurs, and instead opt out of Paytm or Amazon Pay or Google Pay. So suddenly there's this huge push for apps which are made in India. Now, this did not begin with the ban of TikTok. Of course not. It did not even begin at the India-China crisis which happened in the that sector. It happened with the speech the Prime Minister made on Aatmanirbhar Bharat, on the idea of Aatmanirbhar Bharat. Acknowledging the change in the global order, acknowledging the need for companies of the West to move their supply chains out of China, to diversify their supply chains out of China, the PM made a call for Aatmanirbhar Bharat. Now, a lot of critics took it for an isolated Bharat. Some thought that India was following Donald Trump's idea of protectionism, which it wasn't. It was the idea of self-sufficient Bharat. Now, building upon that speech on Atmanirbharta, building upon the ban of TikTok, the Prime Minister over the weekend took to LinkedIn and spoke about a new app challenge. Now, what is this app challenge really about? The Aatmanirbhar Bharat Innovation Challenge, as it has been called, it's a collaboration between the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology along with the Atal Innovation Mission. Now, it runs in two tracks, as the Prime Minister blogged. One is the promotion of existing apps, so like of Chingari, the MobiQuicks, and other apps which are local competitors of the global apps we've been using for a while now. And secondly, the development of new apps. Now, why is this really necessary? Now, one absolute answer is that yes, we need more local ventures to be made famous. We need more local apps. But why do we need them now? Now, one thing is what coronavirus has really changed is the way we work, the way it has given the online, the digital governance, the digital applications a big push. Suddenly, you had all the big basket and grocers backing the big orders. You had GeoMart launching very quickly in between the pandemic. So it has given the idea of digitization a big push, not just in urban centers like Noida or Pune or Bangalore or Mumbai or Delhi even. It has given this digitization a big push in second tier cities, the likes of Kanpur, Lucknow, Chandigarh. All these cities have now received a big digitization push, and so more apps would be required. But it's just not about e-commerce alone. There will be apps which which will have to take place of the likes of Zoom, like GeoMeet did it recently. GeoMeet was launched as a competitor to Zoom because a lot of companies now are using Zoom to coordinate between the work staff and things like that. The utilities, they've all moved online, so a lot of apps will be needed, and therefore this came the vision of the Prime Minister, where he offered people to come up with ideas for new local apps, and there will be the chance to also promote the existing apps. So it's to be more vocal for local. Now, there are 5 aspects I want to consider if we go by app making in India. It's just not about jobs and employment and everything about that. It's not about that. It's not just about keeping Chinese companies out. There are 5 aspects which I want to dig into, and we look at them one by one. The first one is data security and sovereignty. Now, the biggest challenge which was happening with TikTok, now a lot of people felt it was banned for its content. That's not all. There were a lot of backdoor issues with TikTok, that the data of the users was being stolen. So with apps being local, with the apps made in India, one can be assured that these apps will be regulated by the laws of the government of India. There will be better provisions for data security and sovereignty. So the data of Indians will be in India. It will be regulated and processed and analyzed in the laws that govern the government, that are sanctioned by the government of India, that are authorized by the government of India. So in that sense, you are more secure when it comes to data, unlike TikTok, because a lot of people, the US Army, for instance, it had banned the use of TikTok on its bases across the world. So they already felt that there was some data security issues when it came to TikTok. Now, this brings us to the second factor. Why is data security and sovereignty so important? Now, TikTok had 120 million users. It offers a great perspective because TikTok had 120 million active users in India. Now, imagine the data of 120 million users, which is almost 1/10 of the Indian population not being secure. Now, this is just TikTok. TikTok, probably 2 or 3 years from now, it would have had 250 million users. It would have 300 million users. So, this is the next question, the size of the Indian market. This is the second factor why going vocal for local apps is very, very important. The size of the Indian market. By 2026, a lot of experts, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations dealing with the projections of internet and things like that, they project India to have 900 million internet users. Now that's 3 times the population of the United States, almost 3 times, if not exactly. That's twice the population of the European Union. That's almost a billion users. Now you want the billion users, the apps they are using, they need to feel secure about their data. They need to feel secure about how their data will be used. That's the second factor. The third factor, which is very important and it has lost its importance in the narrative very recently, is data localization. Now, until last year, the government of India was very vocal about data localization. They wanted the GAFAs to set up data centers in India. They did not want the data of Indian users to leave the Indian shores. Of course, a copy of it had to be created on some foreign location, but they wanted a copy of it to always be in India for if the law enforcement agencies were required to access some data, for the data to be safe, and for a number of reasons. So data localization was very important from that aspect. Now, if we have more Indian apps coming up, we have more Indian entrepreneurs, of course, data localization will receive a big push. And with that, the investment in the data centers, the employment which will be generated amongst the non-STEM graduates, that is, non-engineer graduates, they will be receiving a big boost in terms of the security of the data centers, in terms of the management of the data centers. So data localization itself will receive a big push. And the entire idea of data localization is to keep the data of Indians safe. And this will be the third factor why going for local apps will become very important. Now, what is the next factor? The one we have been talking about all this long, the 5G factor. Now, 5G, it has been delayed because of the structural problems in the telecom sector in India. It's been delayed across the world because of the Huawei issues and the ZTE issues and the security issues. A lot of other reasons have pushed back the launch of 5G in a lot of countries. For instance, the coronavirus outbreak has somehow hindered the investments in 5G. But nevertheless, 5G is going to come, if not in 2021, at least in 2024, in 2026. By 2030, 5G would be accessible to a billion users. And with 5G, there'll be Internet of Things, there'll be smart devices, there'll be a number of apps that would be curated, that would be created for data sharing. So a lot of data will be generated and a lot of apps would be required to process this data, to make sense of this data. Already we see the reflection, the beginning of it in the smart devices we wear, the likes of Fitbits, the like of smartbands, and the kind of data they process. So with more local apps coming up on that front, the data would be in India. This will be very critical data that can be used to profile people. For instance, their health data would be logged in these apps. And for these apps to be local, it would be another assurance that the data is safe, that the data is in India, that the data is not being used in a wrong manner, as the data of TikTok was probably being used. The last factor is one that is a very important lesson we should draw from the entire TikTok fiasco, that of content regulation and censorship. Now, we've seen this problem with Twitter. A lot of our audiences, a lot of our users on Twitter have often complained that the censorship rules on Twitter, the way the content is regulated and the rules are made, it's not very clear. There's a lot of ambiguity there. It was same with TikTok because there was no clarity on how some content was being censored, and some content which was very violent, the kind which actually encouraged acid attack on girls, that was actually not being censored on TikTok. So one important lesson we need to draw from a fiasco with TikTok, from what we see on Twitter with every third, fourth user every day, is we need better regulation and better censorship rules. Now, of course, if the app owner is not Indian, in, for instance, TikTok or Twitter, the censorship or regulation rules won't be clear. Of course, the government can step in at some time and ask for some sort of content to be regulated, but that's not always the ideal move. The platforms themselves should have very clear rules on what kind of content should be censored or how it should be regulated. With apps being more Indian, the Indian apps being created, one can expect that any kind of anti-India content, the separatist content, the kind which had become viral on TikTok, that won't be given a further push. Now, these are just 5 factors why apps should be made more in India. Why should we opt for more Indian apps? But it's not going to stop here. As more and more apps keep coming on with the advancements of IoT, Internet of Things, that's going to be a huge deal. As more and more apps keep coming up, there'll be greater need to go for apps that are made in India. Because if every Indian wants to be a part of the Make in India program, the one the Prime Minister aims for, it's very important they start with their mobile phones. Thank you. We at Swarajya are working towards creating more exclusive videos, podcasts, and analysis for our Swarajya Patreon subscribers. We've added a link in that description, and you can go ahead and support us for as little as $4.99 on a monthly basis. We look forward to your support. Keep watching, keep supporting Swarajya.